Have you sold the film rights to War then?
No, not yet. I'm in discussions right now about it.
Because initially, and that was another one of my instant reactions, was this is a really interesting documentary and it's beautifully constructed and it gives a really balanced perspective. Like, you know, I felt a pacifist could take something from this. I felt someone who was pro-military could take something from this. Everyone would take something from that journey. But the first thing that struck me was that this will hit everyone's hearts and minds when it is acted and not delivered by soldiers.
Well, yeah, it's a really intriguing idea, and I've been talking to a great filmmaker, a young guy, about the possibilities. I think it's going to go through. I can't say who this is yet until we have a deal, but I think there's a decent chance it will happen.
Yeah, I know although it's that kind of ER concept, isn't it? Like George Clooney makes millions of dollars doing something what ER doctors do every day, and these underpaid soldiers that sit on that mountain and deliver their jobs and deliver their roles will only get that will only get that notoriety when it's depicted by fiction.
Right.
Which and I think that's just really sad, but it is. I mean, and I think it's also how people can deal with the Battle of the Bulge and all of these great war movies, that if you were there recording them in that real time, I don't think people could really handle what that meant, which is why I think this film is so poignant.
Right. Yeah, it's funny, like you watch war movies and guys are always saying really cool things to each other in combat, and that's just not true. Like no one's funny and glib and quick-witted in combat. Like it's like it doesn't work that way. And so whenever I hear dialogue like that, little, witty asides to their friends, like sardonic asides to their friends while they're getting shot at, it's just completely absurd. I mean, it's like makes me upset. It's almost like it's unintentional, but it's a form of, in some ways, it's kind of disrespectful towards what.
I think, by the way, if you did sell the film rights, would you be in the film?
No.
You wouldn't appear in it. Because we were wondering who would play you. I was thinking Clint Eastwood. Do you think that's too old?
Yeah, maybe by 2 or 3 decades.
George Clooney?
No, I wouldn't. I could go with Clooney. No, I don't. I shouldn't be into it. Him and I shouldn't be into it at all. We're journalists. Like the movie should be about those men and the job they're doing out there, and we're there to chronicle it, but we're really not part of the story. So.
I know, but I think that's really interesting because I actually think you are part of the story, though. I know that you tried to be an impartial observer, and I know that you tried not to influence the outcomes, but I actually think that inadvertently you did influence the outcomes, and I think you are part of that story. I know it's difficult for you, because you are part of it, but they seduced you. And to some extent, you became part of the tribe. You joined the brotherhood. You've taken on the language. You're definitely not impartial anymore. You're emotionally connected to it.
Oh, all those things are true. I just think if you put a journalist in that movie, the movie becomes a movie about a journalist, and which would be a shame. So, I mean, if they had a very bit part played by some journalist who was going in and out of there, I mean, that's fine, but it wouldn't. I certainly would hope that my character is not a major character in the movie. I mean, it would have to be a very much a side character to me.
I mean, Dan Kearney said to me that you were his sounding block, that he felt he was isolated on the mountain. He had nobody to talk to. He couldn't talk to his men because they were his subordinates. He couldn't talk up the chain because his job was to deliver the mission, and that actually. But he had all of this emotion that he couldn't vent, and he used you and Tim to release that. And that, I think, by releasing that emotion, that it impacted his ability to deliver his job. So you could have given him those 4 inches on that road that he delivered. You could have been influential in allowing him to push up the mountain just by giving him that venting point.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, you're right. You're right on all those points, but it's really more a creative decision about how to make an effective movie. And I don't think the movie will be more effective in communicating the reality of war if they have a journalist who is in a prominent role. I'll just put it that way. I don't think it would be more effective.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, I think the way the roles have rolled out anyway, it's more the way that the film's delivered is not about prominence, is it? It's about how it's all sewn together anyhow. So I think if you could sew it into the journey, I definitely think though that part of Planet Restrepo and part of this film's journey, that you and Tim are so instrumental in it, that what you even did as embeds. In fact, there's Duncan Larkham, the defence editor of The Sun, was telling me when he was deeply influenced by reading War, just because of the degree of access and the sort of the lack of impartiality that evolved because of this sort of tribalism. And I think that is very significant. And I think it's significant in terms of how governments embed journalists, and because of the fear that there is between, what journalists can do to campaigns. And I think you've crossed that. You've demonstrated. But then I think also because of your time in Liberia, that you as journalists are much more capable of delivering that embedded role, whereas another less savvy, vigilant, sophisticated thinker would have been able to be in that embedded situation and, hold their ground and not threaten the soldiers, really. So I think that's... Right. Just one last thing then, this is my closing thing. This is another thing that's come out of the film for me as well, which is, I don't know if you heard of Diane Fossey. She was played by Sigourney Weaver in Gorillas in the Mist.
Yes.
I just have this kind of sense of that you're going to become like the soldier's Diane Fossey. That you're...
That's a wonderful way of putting it.
You're going to do for soldiers what Diane Fossey did for gorillas in Gorillas in the Mist.
Oh my God! Oh, there's a sentence for my PR person. Well, if you mean gaining entry to a secretive world and understanding it and explaining it, then I take your meaning, and I'm very honored that I was allowed to do that with those guys. One of the nicest things any of them said to me after they read my book, Brendan said to me, he read the manuscript and he said, I don't know how you did it, but you explained us to ourselves. And for me, that was probably the best compliment I ever could have gotten from anyone in this whole experience was that sentence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not exactly the most self-aware people, soldiers, are they?
I mean, they're 20. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the soldier part; it's the 20-year-old part that makes them not very self-aware. You're right. Oh. But a lot of it's their youth.
Do you think men are self-aware though?
Some are.
Do you think? Do you think that? Yeah. I think that. I'm being very generic, but I think men are fundamentally self-centered, like in a way that women aren't.
I mean, this goes back to anthropology. I think it's a matter of survival to be self-centered to a degree. I think that's expressed in different ways by the two genders. I mean, the altruism I saw on Restrepo, the self-sacrifice, the willingness to risk your life for others was, if anything, the exact opposite of being self-centered, because the group affiliation. Men in groups affiliate as a group, and that bond becomes overwhelming. And so in that sense, I mean, I've heard women say, they've sort of contemplated the idea of a female platoon, an all-female platoon on a hilltop for a year. And I've heard many women friends of mine say, oh my God, please no, like that's unimaginable.
Do you know why that is though? Because what you say about altruism on the mountain, because men are fundamentally self-centered, but they care what they think of each other, and there's that pack culture. But also, they can also look after people. Men can be loyal to brothers, whether they like them or not. Women have to like somebody to be loyal to them. And I think fundamentally that is why men are in charge and women aren't in charge, because we as a community, we segregate over whether we breastfeed or bottle feed, or whether we stay at home or whether we go to work. Our community gets disenfranchised all the time, whereas men are just like, shooting shit and eating and wanking, basically.
You're right. And I think for political reasons, it's much easier for a woman to say that than a man. But I think you're absolutely on the right track with that. I think that's very perceptive.